Good morning, everyone. Our lesson today will be about adaptation to a niche. The learning objectives include to understand the concept of a niche, be able to discuss examples of adaptation of organisms to their environment. We are going to discuss adaptation from different points of view, behavioral, anatomical, and physiological. Organisms live in a habitat. They are a part of an ecosystem within which they interact with both biotic environment, which include all other living organisms, with abiotic environment, which include physical and chemical factors in the ecosystem. Members of a single species form a population, while if we are discussing many populations living together, they form what we call a community. Each organism has an ecological niche, which means the role in the ecosystem. This role might be a food niche or a habitat niche. Food niche, what does the organism eat? Or what other organisms that feed on this organism? Competition within an organism with other organism, or the temperature, water, and other requirements that the organism need in its environment. This is what we call the habitat niche. If the organism has only one ecological niche in its habitat, so we can say there will be interspecific competition, which might lead to extinction of one of the species of the organism. If to survive and reproduce, the organism must have adaptations for each of the above points. Adaptation may be behavioral, physiological, or morphological. We can say here that all failure is failure to adapt, and all success is successful to adapt or successful adaptation. So we can say the successful species is well adapted to its niche. Individuals of that species have characteristics that increase their chances of survival and reproduction. Those characteristics can pass on to the next generations. So if the organism was successful, the organism can live in its environment, can survive, and can pass on its genetic characteristics to the next generation. There are three different types of adaptations: behavioral, physiological, and morphological. What is the main difference between them? Behavioral adaptation is an aspect of behavior of the organism that help it to survive and reproduce. For example, like when the organism is attracting a mate. So the behavior of the organism which help it to survive. Physiological adaptation is related to function. Sometimes we call it biochemical adaptation, which mainly how the organism is functioning well to perform its role or its niche in its environment. Also, it might be explained on the cellular level or on the organ level, like ability of the organism to respire anaerobically if oxygen was not sufficient, like the case of anaerobic respiration in yeast. Morphological adaptation, sometimes you call it anatomical or structural adaptation. This will discuss the any structure of the organism which help it to survive in its environment. Like when the cactus has grown spines to prevent grazing, like the camel when it has hump to store fat, it would help it to live in drastic environmental conditions. Let's dig into more details about the different types of adaptation. For anatomical adaptation, for example, the sticky layer of the blubber in seals and whales, it helps to isolate heat and keep the temperature of the living organism steady. So those organisms are called endothermic animals. They have a constant body temperature, which is about 39 degrees Celsius, even if they live in water where the temperature was very low. Sticky hair on the sundew plant that enable it to capture insects. Physiological adaptation, it includes differences in biochemical pathways or enzymes. As we said, aerobic respiration, anaerobic respiration, different ways of excretion, thermoregulation, osmoregulations, all of those are considered as physiological adaptation. How does a diving mammal adapt to stay longer underwater? We call this response mammalian diving response. So how a diving mammal like a seal or whale is able to stay for a long time underwater. One, its heart rate drops significantly. We call this process bradycardia, when the heart rate becomes very low. Two, pump blood around the body less often, mean the circulation becomes slow. Three, the oxygen in the blood is not used as rapidly, mean the rate of respiration, the rate of consumption of oxygen will be reduced significantly here. Muscles work more effectively using anaerobic respiration than those of land-driving mammals. So, oxygenated blood is directed to the brain and to the heart, okay, instead of going to the muscles and to the internal organs. This is why the organism can stay alive for longer period of time underwater. We have another example here for behavioral adaptation, like change to programmed or instinctive behavior, making the organism better adaptive for survival. So the organism change some of its behavior, like estivation that happen in summer for the organisms that live in desert to hide from very hot weather. Also, the hibernation that happened to frogs and other animals to where they reduce their physiological processes in order to adapt to live in very low temperatures. We have here an example, the temperature adaptation of reptiles. At low temperature, the animals orientate themselves to get the maximum sunlight on their bodies. They warm up and move fast, okay, so they can escape from predator and they can feed themselves as well. While at very high temperature, they change their behavior. They minimize sun exposure, so they can hide, they can crawl their body, or they can hide in the sand or shelter from it in order to reduce the heat gain and not to feel very hot at very high temperature. This graph shows you how the whales and seals can slow down their heart rate as they dive. Okay, here when the organism just starting at the surface of water, okay, once it's diving down, okay, you can see by over time the heart rate slows down, or the beats per minute will slow down to their minimum. So from 160 up to down to 20 when they dive underwater. As they going up again, the heart rate will retain its normal activity again to supply all other organs with enough nutrients and oxygen. Looking up here for the lizard, early in the day, early in the day means in the early morning, they flatten themselves against warm ground to heat up in order to gain heat. And when they start to get too hot, like in the midday, they will push themselves away from the ground so they can cool themselves down more easily. It means they are going to reduce their surface area volume ratio, okay, in order to not expose their body to much heat. Remember that lizards are exothermic animals. The body temperature depends on the external temperature. So they need to keep the fluctuation of body temperature within a minimum range by behaving that way. Now we are going to watch this video to look for adaptation of species of the living organism that we can consider them, they are endangered.
So he's sniffing around all the time, getting used to the environment.
Yeah. Never a dull moment. They're always very active. Their metabolism is very high. No such thing really as a fat wolverine. And they don't hibernate like a bear.
So they just keep going all winter?
That's right. They don't have much time. It's all about survival, you know, and Mother Nature doesn't give an animal like this a lot of margin for error.
As scavengers, most of the wolverine's diet is dead animals. Creatures that have perished in these extreme conditions. And to find their food, wolverines take advantage of one of nature's most destructive forces: avalanches. As snow thunders down the mountainside, mammals are often buried beneath. It's thought wolverines can sniff out frozen carcasses, even deep beneath the snow. To test this out, Helen buries some frozen meat deep in the snow. She'll return in a few hours with Jasper to see if he can find it, just using his sense of smell. Before that, she's got a demonstration to show how our noses and the wolverine's work. It involves an orange.
When I sniff the orange, it's really strong, this one, is that the scent molecules from the orange are going up my nose, and they're going up to the top here. And there's a structure up there that's called the epithelial membrane, and that is where the odour detectors are.
It's thought smell works like a lock and key. The scent molecule is the key and will only fit certain locks. The odour detectors. We have 400 different types of locks, but scent molecules can hit many combinations of these receptors, so we can identify thousands of different smells. Most mammals detect scent in the same way, but for wolverines, it's all about sensitivity. Detecting the tiniest traces of scent, even deep under the snow. So let's see how Jasper gets on finding the buried meat. They start several hundred meters away and let Jasper choose the course.
He's smelling things right now, Helen.
And it's not only what's on the snow, it's the air drifting past that he's smelling.
He picks up a scent quickly, but is it the right one?
Oh, having a bit of a sniff here.
He definitely knows there's something here. He's on to some scent there for sure.
His big paws are pretty efficient, aren't they?
Yes, yes.
He looks like nothing would get in his way, isn't he? He's shifting a lot of snow.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go! He's got it!
He got it! He found it.
So we can consider the behavior that you have watched in the previous video, considered as both behavioral adaptation and structural adaptation. Behavioral adaptation, which is the behavior of the bear to catch its prey, and to look in the eyes, or how it looks for its prey, and the physiological adaptation, which is the adaptation of its nose and the sensory cells there in order to detect the position or the place of each of its prey. Social behavior, like hunting as a team or huddling together for warmth, this would increase the animal survival chances. Migration to avoid harsh conditions, these are all considered as behavioral adaptations. Other examples of behavioral adaptations also include the courtship rituals and using tools. Adaptation for survival. Successful adaptation enables species to exploit every possible habitat and the different niche within each habitat. Most of the organisms have mixture of different kinds of adaptation to be able to survive and succeed in their particular environment. We are going to discuss in details two examples of adaptation for survival, the fungal carnivores and the camels that we consider them an ultimate survivors. Some fungi, normal fungi work as saprophytes. Most of fungi are saprophytes, like yeast, like bread mold, and most of the fungi While some fungi can live as active carnivores. You are going to learn more about them in the next slide. Some fungi are active carnivores. They adapt to capture and feed on nematode worms. Some produce sticky nuts or adhesive pads to attract the worm. Some live inside the living worm. Some lasso nematodes, like they trap the worm. The nematode is a kind of round worm. Fungi are adapted to capture and feed on nematode in different techniques. One of them is to produce sticky nuts or adhesive pads. This helps them to trap the worm. Secondly, some of them may live inside the living worm. So the fungus itself live inside the living worm, feeding on the nutrients inside its body. Some other fungi, we call them lasso nematodes because they can trap the nematode. They can trap the worm as they pass through loops of hyphae called constriction rings. Looking here, you can see how the fungus trap the nematode. First is going to form a ring of 3 hyphal cells. You can see here it's a ring composed of 3 hyphal cells. The ring here has been constricted, like to make a closed ring, and then it's going to trap the fungus between the rings, between the 3 hyphal cells. You can see here the nematode, which has been captured or trapped in the ring constructed from the fungus. Of course, it's a very strange behavior, which is very uncommon. Okay, so here we can say that those kinds of fungi, they trap the worm as they pass through loops of hyphae called constriction ring. These include both anatomical and physiological adaptation. You should be aware of how the nematode has been captured by the fungus. So first, the fungus is going to make 3 hyphal cells, a constricted ring, where then the walls are going to change the osmotic potential of the cells, resulting in water moving in fast. Due to the adhesion of both walls, the walls of the fungal cells and the wall of the nematode. So change in osmotic pressure happen, resulting in water moving in. So water is going to get inside the cells, inside the ring, making the ring more inflated. So the ring will inflate and hold the nematode in its grip. Then the nematode pulls its tail through another loop as it moves, trying to escape. So in this way, the nematode will be kept inside 2 loops. Each of them has a constricted ring, which is made of 3 hyphal cells. Within hours, fungus grows more hyphae and penetrate the body of the nematode and digest it. Then the fungus absorbs the nutrients and transport them into its body. It is thought that those predatory fungi evolved from saprophytic fungi in high carbon and low nitrogen environment, because nematodes here provide the fungus with the missing nitrates. Because when the fungus digests the body of the nematode and absorb the nutrients, most of those nutrients are nitrates. This is why the scientists thought that they were predatory fungi that had been evolved long time ago from a saprophytic ones when the environment was having too much carbon and very low nitrogen. Now let's watch this video about adaptation of camels.
Camels are very well adapted to live in the desert, which is hot and dry during the day, but cold at night. They have adapted thick fur on the top of their body for shade, but thin fur everywhere else to maximise heat loss. A large surface area to volume ratio also helps to keep them cool, because heat has more places to escape from. But camels have adapted to tolerate body temperatures of up to 42 degrees Celsius. It's actually a myth that camels can store water in their humps, but they can go for a very long time without drinking water, and they can drink up to 46 litres in one session. They lose very little water through perspiration because their body temperature changes throughout the day, so there is no need to perspire. They also lose very little through urination because their kidneys concentrate urine. Their hump is actually a fat store, which can be respired to release water, and this allows them to go a long time without food, which is scarce. Camels have adapted to have very large flat feet to spread their weight on the sand, and the skin between their toes helps to stop them sinking. They also have 2 sets of eyelashes and large slit-like nostrils to keep the sand away from their face.
This grazing mammal favored grasses, leaves, and shrubs, but it can also stomach thorns. It can also eat stomach thorns and dry vegetation that other herbivores cannot digest. This enables them to survive in areas of sparse vegetation. Camel live in the hottest, driest, and the most inhospitable niche. Camels have developed adaptation to live and survive in this arid environment. Here are some other adaptations for camels. How do camels adapt to their environment? Camels have many adaptations that allow them to live successfully in the desert conditions. Deserts are hot and dry, winds blow sand all around, so camel has long eyelashes, it has nostrils that can open and close. What we can call this kind of adaptations? Yes, it's anatomical or structural adaptations. They have thick eyebrows that shield the eyes from the desert sun. Why does camel have nostrils which can close? Camel has very long nostril and it's very deep inside and the camel can close it. This helps the camel to not let the sand get into its nose. It has also many other adaptations. You're going to learn more about them in the coming slides. As we said, adaptation is divided into many forms. Anatomical adaptation. Camel has grown large eyes, so it can has good vision in many directions. It has long lashes to protect the eyes against the sandy environment. Nostrils are long, slit-like, so the camel can close them to protect against sand and wind. The upper lip is split, hairy, extensible, and sensitive. This helps the camel to identify and gather food and avoid thorns. Another anatomical adaptation here, the camel has a hump on its back. It helps to insulate the animal from sun's heat. Fat is concentrated in the hump. This allows easy evaporation of sweat over the skin surface, over everywhere else on the skin surface, to cool down the camel. Also, camel has large feet and flat with tough pads. This helps to spread out the weight of the camel when it moves on the sand and prevent its damage. Regarding physiological adaptation, the hump on the camel on its back, it has mostly fatty tissue inside. This fat store helps the camel when it's being deprived from food. Fat will be respired, giving metabolic water, large amount of metabolic water, which help produced as a byproduct. So the camel can survive for a very long time without actually drinking water, but it depends on the water produced from metabolism of fat. The supple skin of the camel help in thermoregulation. You are going to learn in the next slide about it. Fat in the hump of the camel also help the camel to use very little water. It restricts the water and reduce the normal water loss to its minimum. Another form of physiological adaptation here, the camel tissue can withstand loss of up to 30% of body water without being damaged. And then, if water is available, the camel can drink 180 liters of water in 24 hours without affecting its osmotic balance of the cells. Fat in the hump stores energy and produces water if the water was scarce. Again, we are still talking about the physiological adaptation, but here for the loss of water or to decrease the water loss in a process we call it osmoregulation. The osmoregulation in camel is done by different adaptation, like the urine concentration of the camel is greater than the seawater, meaning that the camel produces very concentrated urine. Okay, this helps the camel to retain more water. Having concentrated salt level in the urine allow the camel to drink salty water also without changing in its osmotic balance in the blood or in the body cells. So the camel can eat salty water, can eat plants that live in high concentration of salt. Also, if you remember the urinary system in the the loop of hand here is very large, and as the loop of hand gets longer and longer, this means that the camel is able to produce very concentrated urine. Camel is able to consume third of its body weight in drinking 200 liters of water in just 3 minutes. Erythrocytes, which mean the red blood cells of the camel, are oval shaped, which resist osmotic variation without rupturing, being able to swell 2 times their size without being ruptured, which of course it's a unique feature for the camel, which doesn't exist in any other organisms. Camel can slow down the urination during dehydration season to minimize the water loss. So even it slows down the urination. So the urine is very concentrated, means retention of more water. Loop of hand is very long, so help to retain more water and reduce the amount of water produced or urinated. It can drink large amount of water in very short time. The erythrocyte is very resistant to changes in the osmotic pressure, so it's not going to rupture even if there is some change in the osmotic potential. And lastly, the camel can slow down the urination to minimize the water loss to its maximum. Camel had another form of physiological adaptation, which to the temperature change, we call it thermoregulation. You know, the animal being an endothermic animal, able to fluctuate their body temperature from 6 to 7 degrees, unlike any other mammal. Any other mammal, just 1 or 2 degrees high or low in the body temperature will affect its metabolic activities, including human, while the camel can tolerate fluctuation of the body temperature from 6 to 7 degrees Celsius. Camel can tolerate this high temperature change and store the heat during the day, which causes drastic body temperature fluctuation. The camel stores the heat until night, so it's allowed the stored heat to be released to the outside by radiation without lost water in much sweating. So even during night, when the animal loses its heat, it doesn't sweat as much. Okay, this means that the camel can adapt to variable temperatures, keep the water inside, and the body can adapt or can tolerate fluctuation in the body temperature. The supple skin in the camel or on his skin is covered with fine hairs. We call it Weber. This erect to trap an insulated air layer during cold nights. It can also withstand the wide variation of internal body temperature. Camels can lose 30% of the body weight through the water loss and then make up in 10 minutes drinking without changing its osmotic potential of its blood. So the blood never thickens under severe dehydration. So even if the animal loses too much water, there will be not much change in the osmotic pressure, and the animal is not going to get dehydrated. Also, the she-camel, the female camel, produces diluted milk even when they are dehydrated. This enables them to be a successful animal in breeding and also to provide a good meal, water, and food resource for the people, because the people can slaughter the camel, the people who are living in the desert and take care of camels, they slaughter them, or they can take their milk, they can take their muscles. They are very delicious and they have much water content inside. Structural adaptation of camel includes many forms of adaptation. First, camels has low surface area to volume ratio. This allows the camel to reduce amount of water loss to its surrounding, as it doesn't have to have very high metabolic rate compared to smaller animals. The hump of the camel contains fatty tissue which act as a food store. 3. Camel has similar heat barrier with its coat of fur. The thick fur of the camel can significantly reduce the amount of environmental heat gained as it carries an insulated layer. It only has 2 toes, not 5 like us, with very large surface area, which is perfect for the sand. The foot has large calluses over 1 centimeter thick. All surfaces that come in contact with calluses to keep the camel's skin from being burned by the hot sand. These are structural or anatomical adaptation of the camel. Behavioral adaptation. Camels have learned to face the sun while lying down, causing less of the body exposed in this way. You know how the camels sit down on the sun. So here, the body will catch less sun and doesn't heat up as fast. 2. During sunset or in the early morning, the camel can absorb little heat by conduction. 3. Camels urinate on their legs, so water touches the legs. This helps to cool the camel down as the blood passes by the veins inside their legs. They spend their night searching for food. As it is cooler, this will reduce the energy loss and water loss. So the camel doesn't need to eat in the morning or move in the morning. It makes all its activities at night. Also, camels herd or groups together, laying down to minimize the surface area exposed to the sun. This will help to reduce energy loss and also energy gain from the sun. They are very good browsers for vegetation and shrubs. Now let's solve the checkpoint questions. Question 1, explain the importance of niche concept in understanding the adaptation of organisms. How to answer this question? A niche is the way an organism lives, include what it eats, whether it moves, and so on. In order for the animal to be successful, the animal should be able to grow and produce offsprings. The organism needs to be well adapted to the conditions around it, and therefore its niche, so that it can find food and have a mate. Question 2, looking at the data in the figure B, you can look at it in your textbook, answer the following questions. What do the negative numbers on the x-axis represent? Going back to figure B, you will see that it represents the time before they dive. So 0 represents the time of start diving, and the time before diving is the negative value. B, how long did the recorded dive last? Looking back, you'll find it's approximately 4.5 minutes. C. What was the percentage depression of the heart rate? Based on this, how long would you predict that the dive might have lasted without bradycardia? Bradycardia is a reduce in the heart rate. What will be the answer of this question? You need to make the simple calculation. Started at 160 minus 20 over the original, that was 160 into 100. This is the percentage change. So it will equals about 88%. Without bradycardia, it lasts only for 4.5 minutes into 12% equals 32 seconds. D. State the type of adaptation involved in this response and explain why it's so important to the survival of the seal in its ecological niche. So state the type of adaptation. Is it anatomical, physiological, or structural involved in this response, and explain why it's so important to the survival of the seal in its ecological niche. We discussed this point in much details. Of course, it's a physiological adaptation, enables the seal to stay underwater and hunt for food in the harsh environmental conditions where food was not enough or very scarce, giving it a survival advantage over other animals that don't have the bradycardic response. Question 3. How do anatomical and physiological adaptations of camel help them to survive in their hot, dry, plant browsing niche? Camel has, for anatomical adaptation, camel has grown large eyelashes that give good vision in many directions and are protected by long lashes which protect the eyes against sandy environment. Also, they have long slit-like nostrils, can be closed to protect against sand and wind. The upper lip is split, hairy, extensible, slightly prehensile, and sensitive. This allows camels to identify and gather food and avoid thorns that are a protective adaptation of many desert plants. It has a hump on its back. This helps to insulate the animal from heat of the sun. The fat concentrated in the hump allows easy evaporation of sweat over the rest of the skin. Surface, as there is little fatty insulation under the skin. So the fat insulation only in the hump, but nowhere else in the body of the camel. This is important to cool the camel down. The feet is large and has just 2 toes, flat, and has tough pads. This spread out the weight of the camel as it walks over the hot sand and prevent heat damage. The tough pads on the knees prevent damage from hot sand when the camel rests. Physiological adaptation of the camel that help it to survive in hot, dry grazing niche. First, a camel can withstand a wide variation of internal body temperature. Most mammals and camel, under ideal conditions, maintain their body temperature only within 2 degrees Celsius range. But under harsh condition or heat stress, the camel is dehydrated and cannot afford to lose water in thermoregulation. Camel can allow its body temperature to vary over 6 degrees. This saves energy and water as it doesn't need to produce so much sweat. Camels can lose 30% of their body weight through water loss and then make up in 10 minutes drinking water without changing its osmotic potential of the blood. Consequently, the blood doesn't become so thick and unable to flow when the camel is extremely dehydrated, enabling it to survive in very dry conditions. As the fat in the hump is broken down to release energy during cellular respiration, water is produced as a byproduct, and this metabolic water means camels can survive longer than most mammals without actually drinking water. Camel body tissues can withstand a loss of up to 30% of body water without being damaged. It can go without water in the desert heat for up to 10 days, vital for survival in the desert niche. camel can withstand big temperature fluctuations, which mean that they minimize water loss by sweating. They have kidneys adapted to produce very concentrated urine, as we said, by having very long loop of Henle. This reduces water loss and enables camels to drink quite salty water. This production of urine is also slowed down to a minimum when the camel is dehydrated, again reducing water loss and maximizing the ability of the camel to survive in hot, dry grazing niche. In the next slide, you will see the full answers of all of those questions. Here is a summary of the answer of question 1 and 2. And here is a summary of the answer of question 3. Remember that you can download the video as a PDF or a PowerPoint, print it out to study and keep it for your final revision. Thank you very much.